Sometimes one of the hardest things for neurodivergent people like us is to do the things that help us. We know that meditation and spiritual practice can be good for us, right? It can be really hard to make that a way of life. Yet it is possible, and I want to show you how by talking with people like us who have lived experience of already creating this spiritual way of life, a way of life that really helps them thrive and ultimately to give the gifts of their wild heart to the world. Hey, wild-hearted beings. This interview is with Michaela Daystar, who is a friend of mine, and I consider her a teacher. She is a Reiki teacher and practitioner, very rooted in the Japanese origins of the system of Reiki. She founded Heartscapes in 2017, in her words, as a space that operates at the intersection of self-reflection, spiritual practice, and social action. Central to her work is her relationship to the land she lives on, the plant communities she shares a space with, and her 20 years as an avid gardener and hobby herbalist. Her garden is a classroom for the exchange of wisdom, from the mystical to the logistical. Michaela has a background in social justice leadership. She is a homesteader. She grows a lot of her own food. She is dyslexic, and I feel like her story and her experiences might resonate with some of you. With dyslexia can come kind of ADHD-like symptoms, right? It can be hard to create spiritual practice, and she's managed to do it in a way that fits her brain. Michaela just has such a big heart, and it comes out in so many amazing ways. Okay, let's hear from Michaela. I'm so pleased to have
Wow.
you here. How does that all sound?
That was such a robust introduction. I love the threads that you pulled from different sources. So yeah, thank you. That was fun. Taking a little
Yeah.
stroll through the biosphere.
Love it. Yeah. Well, let's talk. Oh, so excited to talk. I mean, what made you want to talk about this topic?
Yeah, the easy answer is that, it's my job to talk about spirituality. Literally, it's I'm a teacher and a speaker and a provider of holistic services to folks. And so, talking about these things and through the lens, of course, of my own experience, because that's primarily what we have to offer people, is something that I'm doing every day. But I think on the underneath the obvious answer of it's my job, there's something I think really valuable of reliving our story in different contexts and at different points in our life, having that opportunity to, to have somebody ask questions, to compare and explore the crossroads and connections of our own experiences with each other. There's something very healing and informative about doing that. And so when these opportunities present themselves, I really see that as a gift to me, as an opportunity to just take another look back at the threads of my
Mm,
life that have woven together to you know
yeah.
my life. And to do that through the lens of what has heart and meaning to the questioner, right? And so I've never been asked about this intersection between neurodiversity and spirituality, and I'm fascinated by that connection. Exploring my own neurodiversity is something that it's kind of been with me my whole life, but I'm in a much more intentional space around it right now. So the timing is really lovely for the conversation.
Ah, that's so cool. And I really love to hear your story. Where would you like to start?
Yeah. Yeah, thinking about, what would be the most useful entry point, in terms of the story of how does a person build the spirituality that they come to have. Our pathways to it are also unique, of course, with also similar beats. So, I started thinking about my journey with spirituality, and there seem to be kind of three main phases of my life that contribute to where I am now, and then also several just aspects of who I am and what my life has looked like. And some of those you touched on in the bio. I'm a person who was, raised, the spiritual and religious identity I was raised inside of was atheist, was basically or agnostic. My dad identifies as an atheist, my mom as an agnostic. In other words, we don't log an opinion about about what is going on in the unseen realm. But they were also very open with me about, they're like, go and explore for yourself, find that pathway for yourself. Um, so that experience of a certain amount of freedom, but also a lack of guidance and a lack of structure around what spiritual practice is, what it looks like. What is the distinction between religion and spirituality? Where do they merge? Where are they different from each other? I just had very little guidance from my home in that realm, in ways that now I can see as both benefiting me and also being very challenging for me. Secondly, where we grow up, what the culture that we grew up in is incredibly important. I grew up in Berkeley, California, which is, really a kind of, new age spirituality epicenter, certainly of the United States. A place where there's a lot of history of experimental spirituality, new age spirituality, a lot of blending of various spiritual paths in a way that as a child was very exciting to me, and kind of gave me this playground of paths that one could follow. But that also brought confusion, and ultimately it brought a sense of a certain lack of integrity, of not having a clear understanding of where these different traditions came from. And I have some very clear memories of moments of kind of waking up to topics like cultural appropriation, spiritual appropriation, the ways in which it's disrespectful to kind of blend lots of different cultures, spirituality together without context for what these things are, where they came from. And then, similar to that, also based on kind of how I grew up and the communities that I was in, there's this thread of social justice, which you spoke to in the introduction. The idea, I worked, my formal work was in the realm of social justice leadership development for a very long time. My early, teenage years had a lot of activism and a lot of kind of exposure to activist communities. And so, cultivating a spirituality that is rooted with concepts like freedom and justice and equity, inclusion, and again, that resists cultural appropriation and kind of harm being done in the name of spirituality, has very much shaped the way that I have developed my own spiritual practice. So those factors kind of contributed to an early phase of life, let's say, teenagehood through early 20s. Ironically, my atheist father was also the organist for Lutheran churches my entire life. He still is. He's in his 70s and is still the
Wow.
organist for Lutheran church in rural Pennsylvania. And so there was always this paradox of like, I would go to church with him every Sunday, go to Sunday school and do all the kid stuff that you do. But he was literally kind of whispering in my ear, but don't buy it. Don't believe
Wow.
it.
That's amazing.
Like,
Wow.
it was very much a like, I'm here for work because I love music, and I'm, he was in love with music and with the classical music that feeds into a lot of religious music. And that was a way for him to have, another form of income, but was just definitely like, don't buy it, kid. Like,
Wow. Yeah.
don't buy in, and that was very confusing, right? For a small child to
Yeah,
be
totally.
put you into a religious community, but tell you that it's all a bunch of BS.
Wow. That's so interesting. That feels, yeah, I can see how formative it would have been for you. Like, I can sort of see how that played out in your questioning of how we do spiritual practice in the modern inverted commas world.
Yeah, and I think it gave me I think that kind of messaging around organized religion, Christianity specifically, but also kind of extending that to organized, structured religion as having, these negative aspects, these, ways in which harm has been caused through power structures that are involved with major religion. That really, I think, instilled a certain aversion to structured religion and spiritual
Mm,
practice,
mm,
but again, without really anything to kind of take its place, right? Not
yeah.
anything to, but then what do you have, right? If you don't want to have this kind of structured, um, dogma and this power structure, then what is there, right? What does spiritual practice look like? And so from a pretty young age, I was aware that the most direct link that I had, being absent a spiritual community, was direct engagement with nature. That the natural world was where I could, feel things that felt beyond, beyond the seen world, right? That
Mm.
went beyond the logic of daily life.
And how old were you when you sort of realized that?
Um, I mean, as long as I can remember, I really wanted to be in nature. But I would say the
Yeah.
first like specific experience that I could identify as a spiritual experience happened when I was probably around 11 or 12. I would take the bus up from my house in Berkeley up into the hills. There's a regional park called Tilden Park, and it's kind of a eucalyptus forest and little ponds and paths and a little farm. And it was really kind of my home base as a kid. It was the woods. Like it was in the middle of the city, but it was also the woods. And it was a place that I could get to on the bus and could spend time. And you know kids had a little bit more freedom to just kind of free range at that time. So I would take the bus up there, and there was this particular spot on the edge of the little farm where there was just four trees that kind of made a square, like they were in a what seemed to me a perfect square, and that seemed kind of special. That there would be this like geometric shape caused by these trees that
Mm.
that just grew there. It felt kind of special. And I remember just kind of sitting, I called it four tree, and I would sit in the middle of it. And I guess what I would now call meditate. I definitely did not know that word at the time, but just kind of be, just kind of be with the space, with nature, spy on people because there was a path right there I could watch. And I had this experience of feeling a sense of connection with the life that was there, and this feeling of kind of traveling through the trees in a way that you might call an out of body experience, but it kind of was and it wasn't. It was more of a shift of perception. It was almost like getting into the perception of an insect and just kind of being in the space in a way that didn't feel normal.
Wow.
Very brief little moment, but like to this day I can like feel that. And it was probably one of the most like direct experiences of interconnection and the mystery that I've had in my life. I think I was just more open to it as a young person than as an adult.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the first time I can remember having that sensation. It's definitely a core
Wow.
early memory for me. I've written about it. Like I've cited this particular experience like when talking about my spiritual journey for a long time. Um, and I think it did a few things. Firstly, I was having this experience of freedom as a, young child, able to take the bus up to the woods and spend the day up there by myself. I tended to be a bit of a loner kid. I was a bit of a weirdo kid in my school. I, sat in the corner reading comic books and would hole up in the back of a comic book store, for hours at a time and
Yeah.
just draw pictures and things. I was just kind of that weirdo, nerdy kid. Got bullied a lot for that. So I tended to spend a lot of time alone. And to be able to have the freedom to go out into nature by myself was special at the time, and it was a new thing. And then to make the choice, I think, to sit in the middle of this grove of trees and just observe life. It seems to me now like an interesting choice to make for a city kid. Um, it was like there was this intrinsic need to go find those experiences, and I feel very grateful that the Bay Area where I lived while it's a very dense like urban area, there's also these pockets of nature that are very easily accessed. And so it felt like there was this specialness to it that I wasn't finding anywhere else, and I think that that's part of what stuck with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I just, yeah, I just I love that. I feel like these experiences, I feel like a lot of us have these experiences in some way, but we don't necessarily talk about them. Also, my cat's just joined. This is Poppy.
Petey. I've got
Yeah.
two of my four cats are posted on either side of me.
Yeah, great. And I feel like we can sit alone in that if we don't have the community, somebody to talk about that with, or even think that we could share that. And to
Yeah.
me, that sharing, I think is really important because I think it helps us get it out of here. And sorry, you
Oh, just I really appreciate that. I mean, it feels really poignant because at that time of my life, that was what I was missing. I didn't have anybody to talk to
yeah
about it. Like, nobody that I felt like would have any like that I could trust with that, like that you would know what I'm talking about, care about it. I literally did not have a spiritual community,
yeah
and I didn't have a lot of friends at the time, and it wasn't something my parents ever talked about, so it didn't occur to me to talk to them. Although I think they would have been very open to that conversation had I had it. It literally would not have occurred to me to talk to my parents about esoteric weird experiences in the trees. um and I feel like much of my life has been characterized by seeking community generally and seeking spiritual community specifically, and having many um iterations of that, many attempts at that, many painful experiences within community around that. And where I am now, it feels like that that's been paid off, right? That like a lifetime of trying to figure out how to have genuine, honest, connected community around things like that. Um, because I'd had community around education and around hobbies and around work, but to have, real in-depth community around the intersections of all of those things and our spirituality is something that's relatively new in my life. And I'm really grateful that I finally got here in this third phase of my spiritual
yeah.
journey that I'm in at the moment. Yeah.
I'm really happy. Like I feel really happy for you because I really feel that too. And it's recent for me too. And I've had a bit of baggage around, and it means so much. I just feel like there's an innate kind of drive really to want to connect like this because we're experiencing the most wondrous things that we can in this life sometimes I feel this I guess sometimes that's called the ineffable and we just can't find the words for it but when we can at least we know when each other when we're talking about just being in together we know that we know I guess and yeah, I think I felt alone in that, and yeah, I'm happy. I'm really happy for you to have that. Yeah, it's really beautiful. Yeah, I think it's one of the most, to me, it feels like one of the most beautiful things that we can have. Um, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, and it includes things like, building the capacity to disagree, and to have difficult conversations and to not be identical in how we think and believe and to let that be okay. For a long time, those things weren't okay for me. I was like, I don't want to have any disagreement or difference, with the people who are in my community if they're in my community. And that put a lot of barriers up to genuine connection. And, when I think about the intersection between, my spirituality and my work life and my commitment to social justice, there's a real, um, like learning curve around those things that happened kind of in the, middle of my life when I really was called upon to begin working with people across difference, like in the context of social justice work. And I was raised in a very homogenous culture as far as political thought goes, like very racially diverse, very diverse in terms of many different identities, but a very politically homogenous place. And so I didn't have a lot of experience like having genuine disagreement with people around things that mattered in a way that actually respected the other person's view, right? There was this like, well, if they disagree with this set of values and principles and beliefs, then they're wrong. you know, then they're just wrong, right? And they're probably not good people. And so, it's okay to not like them and not want to talk about them, and that's a very
Yeah.
overly simplified, but that's part of what I internalized as the message. And so, over time, kind of really having to challenge that in a very painful way of like, actually there's very good people that I really care about who think very differently than I do about, things that really matter to both of us. And is it okay to just identify them as wrong, or should I learn how to listen to them and see where we actually have common values and are maybe going about those values differently, or whatever it is. And ultimately building that capacity in the context of these political conversations allowed me to relax around spiritual community. The first spiritual community that I ever felt really well rooted inside of, ironically, was a Presbyterian church.
Wow.
And it was when I moved to the town I'm in now, Davis, California. I've lived here 13 years. And, after this kind of early life experience of, kind of floating around, kind of experimentally trying, let me dabble in Celtic paganism, let me dabble in Buddhism, let me dabble in whatever this is. I don't even know what it's called, but it seems cool, like this very kind of Berkeley hippie, like floating from, from thing to thing.
Yeah.
And then coming to a place where that didn't feel like it was in good integrity. It didn't feel like how I wanted to live and how I wanted to be in relationship with culture and with spirituality. And then kind of went into this period of just like, well, I'm just gonna not, like, I don't have any religion. I don't have anything formal. I wasn't raised any particular way. And I'm not allowed to engage in these other cultural practices because I don't understand them. And I feel like a bad person doing it. I had all of this like trying to figure out how I can engage as a, white American, person in California, how to do that in integrity. For a very long time, I just kind of opted out. I was like, well, spiritual path, not necessary. I'm going to focus
Mm.
on the mundane. I was raising my daughter and, I was married and working on work and going to school, and, just kind of the mundanity and the logistics of life took center stage for a very long time. And when we moved from the Bay Area up here, it's about 2 hours away, for various reasons that had to do with what ultimately would end my marriage. But we moved here. I remember having this conversation with my ex-husband that was like, if we're gonna leave the only place we've ever lived, we're gonna leave all our friends and family, start over in a new place, like we have to get with building community immediately. And the
Mm.
easiest way to do that is to join a church.
Yeah. Wow. Right.
And it was this interesting, like, I'd never wanted to join a church. I'd never wanted to, my whole life from my dad saying, don't believe
Yeah.
it, kid,
Yeah.
had been this rejection of that kind of formal structure. But it was like, if we can find a church that doesn't feel like it's putting all kinds of pressure on us to be a particular way, then I want to try having some kind of spiritual or religious community. And I think that, I was talking about it very logistically again, like this is the fastest way to meet people and to have
Yeah.
like, connect with resources and like programs and childcare and stuff. It was a very
Yeah.
logistical argument I was making. But in my heart, there was a piece of me that's like, hey, maybe you should like rest
Oh.
into a fully formed spiritual community for a while and stop just flailing around trying to figure it out on your own.
Wow.
Even if it's like you're not going to go be a Christian, like maybe just try resting inside of some structure for a little while.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
so, I love the compassion in that. Just giving yourself that. Oh, wow.
And we
Yeah.
landed in an amazing church that never, I joked to my ex-husband, the first time somebody comes up to me and says, "Have you accepted the Lord Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior?" I'm out of there, right?
Yeah.
And that never happened, not one time.
Yeah.
Um, it ended up being a church that was perfectly fine with you having, like, you could be a Buddhist or a Muslim or
Oh,
a atheist or whatever, like
that's
just
beautiful. Yeah.
just come and be with us. And so there was this freedom to, as I said, to rest into a community in a way that still let me be myself. Um, and that was a first time experience for me.
Wow. Oh, I love the
And
practicality of that. Oh, sorry, sorry.
yeah, no, I'm sorry. I just pulled a thread that I hadn't even considered before, but it was in that church that I met my first Reiki teacher.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
Yeah, she was one of their spiritual directors and kind of worked in the office. And I was going through, a really challenging time, and in one of those moments where you're kind of desperate for something to intervene and help with the difficult time. And sometimes in those sorts of situations, you end up with a kind of an openness, a receptivity to noticing things that might help you that you might not have noticed before. And I just heard her in the back of the office at the church saying, "Oh, I'm going to teach my next Reiki class next week." And I was like, "What did you say? What is that thing that you just said? When is that happening? Can I do that? I don't know what that is, but can I do it?"
Mm,
You
mm.
know? And yeah, I just kind of pulled those two pieces of the story together. So
Wow, that's so cool. I love it how we find our thing. That's a theme that's really important to me because I really want to hear about how people find their thing. Because I think when we're lost, when we feel lost, I think it can be encouraging to hear that we will find our thing, even though it feels like we'll never find what it is we are looking for. And I love that. Yeah, I love that. And it's always it's a story that we'll never forget, I think.
yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah.
There's also a piece in there, we started off with the premise of looking at the intersection of, neurospiciness and spirituality. And, we haven't quite touched on that yet. But there's a piece of that that kind of lands here. So, I'm diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD, and that means a whole lot of things, different things to different people. So mostly, most of my life, I kind of focused on what that meant for like getting schoolwork done, and kind of it was presented to me in a school context, and then once I left school, it kind of went out of my consciousness as something that mattered to my life until more recently. Um, but when I think about it, that whole characteristic of kind of flitting about from thing to thing, is very much tied to the way that my brain works, which is very airy, very distractible, very, I love to start things. I have a hard time finishing them. I get bored easily and want to shift to the next thing, right? So that, played into, in the absence of structure, again, the absence of a religion or a home, um and just being invited to go figure it out, there was this like puddle jumping experience that it made it very difficult to really spend time in any one place because I would get bored. And you can't cultivate a robust spirituality if you're not willing to camp out in one place for a
Yeah,
while,
yeah,
and to
exactly.
actually be with it and be maybe not very good at it for a while, and like learn and research and then have experiences. And I didn't want to do that. I
Yeah.
wanted to
How
kind
did
of
you,
dance
yeah.
about.
What did you do? How did what happened? Tell us more.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. I'm kind of in the question in this moment,
Mm.
not having ever really
Mm.
pulled that particular thread, but I think again, what happened was that, hitting that kind of rock bottom place. As I mentioned, my marriage ended, and that was a very protracted experience when kind of that unraveling happened over very intensely over a 3-year period, but really over a 6-year period. Um, and so, in those 3 years from moving here to, 3 years in, it was just a very difficult, painful time. And being able to survive and navigate that required me to put more structure in my life and in my thinking, more persistence in my behavior, more diligence. Just for today, I am diligent in like figuring out how I'm going to actually do this.
Yeah, yeah.
It required me to kind of put structure around my day to day in a way that was new. Not that there hadn't ever been the need for structure, but it was a new need. And I was very aware that, you know, feeling supported in a way that was bigger than the logistics, right? So that phrase that you shared earlier, moving from the mystical to the logistical and back and forth between those things, there was a lot of logistics that had to happen to, disentangle a 15-year marriage with 2 kids.
Yeah.
Uh, but there, and I was very aware that I wasn't going to get through all of that if there wasn't some sort of mystical container that was holding it.
Mm.
And so the need to kind of have some spiritual structure, something that I could call a spiritual practice and community, became important in a way that it hadn't been before. And
Uh,
so I think that really sharpened my focus, so again, really being able to, there was 3 spiritual practices that I encountered during that time that, many things. I got support from many different places, but 3 in particular that have become basically the container of my spirituality. And that was the system of soul collage, the system of Reiki, and certain shamanic practices um, that were more for a particular time, but that have stayed with me in certain ways. And there was just this sharpness of focus that came in that's, not very common in my experience. Again, that moment when I just heard her say, I'm teaching a Reiki class, and it was like totally zeroing in on, like, I don't know what that is, but sign me up.
yeah.
And so that, Reiki was really the first spiritual practice that I pursued in any kind of consistent long-term way. And I'm still at it now, 10 years later. And so that really became, that first practice that I really made my own. Again,
Yeah,
this
yeah.
church, Presbyterian church, was like my first spiritual home,
Mhm.
but um, but that was less about spiritual practice than it was about community and about just feeling welcome.
Yeah, yeah. How did it feel like creating that kind of spiritual structure? Um, like having said that, that you did find it, challenging to stay with one thing, and but obviously you're going through this situation, and that need can really, like a lightning rod that can pull us. That was my own experience actually, was really my own big life change was the lightning rod that pulled that stuff together. Yeah, what was that like, creating that structure? Was it a challenge? Did it just happen?
Yeah, well, I would say it was, I mean, it's always challenging to start something new, and to learn something new and to step into something that you've never experienced before. But it was very exciting. And there, I started studying with that first teacher that I met at the church, fairly soon after my ex and I separated. So it was really like all woven into this kind of reclaiming and resetting my life time period. And so that was a very exciting time. It was a very challenging time. Again, the logistics of being a single mom and all the things that happen when that happens. were very present, but it was also very exciting to be able to think like, well, who am I outside of this experience that's been going on for so long and been so difficult? I was with my ex-husband my entire adult life. Like we got together when I was 16. So like I literally had never been an adult outside of that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was this certain kind of reborn feeling of like I get to kind of explore who I actually am. Um, and so having a place to do that that felt generative was really lovely. And because I was so very early on in, what we might call a healing journey, there was a lot of misplaced energy also. I had spent about a year in doing Codependence Anonymous, which is a 12-step program that helps you to unlearn codependent behavior. And that really was my first like step in the journey. And so coming out of that, I kind of felt like I had fixed my problems. Like yeah, I did the work, I'm good. I'm better now. I'm going to be my best self. And I was really drawn to Reiki primarily because I wanted to heal other people. And what I wasn't aware of at the time was it really was still my impulse for it was still coming from a place of codependence of like if I can make everybody else feel good and better, then I will be better. Right? Everybody else has to be okay so that I can be okay. And so let me learn this new, sexy, interesting practice that can help me, be this healer so that everybody can be okay, so that I can be okay.
Yeah.
And that was kind of a script that was running in the background. I wasn't aware of it until much later, but it was very much an emphasis on, not a self practice as a spiritual practice for myself, so much as a modality that I could use to apply to other people. And at a certain point, that became very dissatisfying.
Mm.
Um, I sensed that there was more underneath. I mean, one of the challenges, I would say pitfalls of many forms of Western Reiki is that there is this overemphasis on healing and doing for other people, and there's not an emphasis on what the actual original intention of the practice was, which was that it is a self practice. It is a practice for self knowledge, self development, spiritual depth that then overflows, from the inside out to impact the people in our lives. But to think of it as primarily a vehicle for helping other people without doing anything in here was faulty. It was faulty belief and thinking. And after about 3 years, that got very dissatisfying. I also was, kind of back where I started with, practicing a spiritual practice that obviously had a mashup of different things involved. I knew it was a Japanese practice, but we're learning about chakras, which I knew was an Indian. We were
So your
learning.
alarm bells are going off. You're like,
Yeah, exactly. So this like kind of nagging voice of like, "Ooh, am I doing that thing again? Like, am I
mm,
stepping back into that kind of shaky integrity?" So at that point, I really focused again and turned the lens back on myself and began learning about what Reiki was and its origins. And, you know, surprise, surprise, what it is at its origins is a self-practice. And so that really was kind of the pivoting point of really settling into what I now can confidently call my spiritual practice.
So that's the core. That is the core of your practice. And like, could you give us a little peek, like, what does that look like for you, day to day, week to week, month to month?
Yeah. Um, so yes, in terms of the formal structure of my practice, the system of Reiki is that structure, and the 5 elements of the system, various practices inside those elements, forms the structure as well as the philosophical framework that comes through Japanese Buddhism. And alongside of that, part of how I now have come to think about how we have a robust, integrous practice of a system that is from a different lineage than our own cultural lineage, My lineage is English and Welsh and Scottish primarily. Um, and so, Celtic spirituality is also a thread there for me. And so once we understand a practice really well for what it is and understand ourselves as well as we can, then we start getting these organic manifestations of our spirituality that is an alchemy of those cultural origins that are not mine. I am not Japanese, and the lineages that are mine, and at the places of natural intersection. So for me, that natural intersection is back to my roots, being in the natural world. So my identity as a gardener and as an herbalist and as, what I think of as a land tender is very much also part of the practice. So in terms of what that looks like daily, um, I've had to interrogate myself around the concept of regular diligent practice. One of our precepts is just for today, I am diligent, in my practice.
Yeah.
And I think, back to really accepting my brain and my neurospiciness and the way that I need to operate. I find it incredibly difficult to have a routine where I do the same practice regularly at the same time, anything like that. It it literally does not serve me well to try to do that.
Mm.
Now, I say that knowing full well that there could come a time when it will serve me to put in the effort to build that kind of consistency.
Yeah.
But what has served me so far is to allow that practice to be organic. And so my emphasis, in my teaching comes from that, which is that we need our practice to be available in our daily life. So many times a day, I'll drop into some of the breathing practices that are foundational for Reiki. I might kind of drop into a little contemplation about the precepts in regard to a certain situation. But I would say most often when I really feel like I'm in practice, outside of teaching, where I'm very formally teaching people specific practices, most of that practice happens in the garden, and it happens when I'm just sitting and observing life and being present with what's happening in
Well,
that moment, being aware of the season that I'm in, appreciating the season that I'm in for whatever it is, um, seeing how I can be in response with the natural world. And in those moments, my Reiki practice is very natural and very automatic, and it's just coming alongside those kinds of observations. So I would say that's how it looks most of the time.
wow.
The other, of course, big one is, again, I teach this practice, and so in those contexts, it gives me a container to be more formal in the practices, which I very much appreciate. It gives a structure that has an external source of accountability, my students,
I understand that.
to bring me back into like structure and formality. So I don't, there's this theme of like structure and fluidity, right? Being firm and flexible.
Mm.
That's kind of woven throughout my life, and quite a bit of tension between those two things at various points. And
Uh,
I feel like I'm finding my balance with it.
oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I love that. It's almost like, I mean, even with the structure that is around that teaching, in a way, you could see it as an organic kind of that balance between the tension, because it's needs must, right? It's like, well, this is what the situation is calling for in a way. I love that. I'm so overjoyed that you've shared this. My head is tingling. I think that's my happy place. To me, it in a way, it feels like connecting with those moments, just a little snapshot, and it feels wonderful.
Mm.
And I love the way that you talk about that gardening is so that's like the core of your practice. I do have one burning question that I'd like to ask, if that's okay.
Sure.
What is your favorite dinosaur?
That is such an important question. Wow. like you're hitting the real questions here. The funny thing is, my younger daughter, Layla, loves natural science, and she and her grandfather, my dad, the aforementioned atheist Lutheran music minister, um, they watch dinosaur documentaries when they get together. They go through the whole Walking with Dinosaurs BBC series
Yeah.
every time we visit
Uh,
them in Pennsylvania. And so I've gotten a lot of dinosaur education, but I don't know the names of any of them really,
mm.
except the big ones, that everybody
Yeah.
knows. But I think I right in this moment I'm gonna have to go with the like giant like deep sea dinosaurs. The
Oh,
like
yeah.
I don't know the name, but I have it like the whale
Yeah.
ancestors, right? Like the
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
giants
Yeah.
of the ocean, right? Which
Mm.
didn't survive very long, relatively speaking. They were a fairly short part of the story because they were so very large and just required so much space and so much food. But there was something just so elegant about these just behemoth creatures that could move so beautifully in the water. And
Yeah.
that's what my answer is today.
I love it. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. I think it's good to think about. Yeah.
What's your favorite dinosaur, Sally?
Look, I don't, there's so many, and I think I like stegosaurs, stegosaurus. They've got that cute little head and the big body. Maybe because it reminds me of my cats. I'm not saying I overfeed my cats, but
Yeah.
a little.
It's a good one.
Or maybe I'll stick some armor plates on my cats one day and see if they want to be stegosaurus.
There you go.
Like, what would you say to, somebody who is dyslexic that is feeling like they want to create practice, but it might be difficult or they're not? What would you say to you in the past, if you like?
Yeah, I think I would encourage that person, including my past self, to really notice what lights you up and what
Mm.
captures your imagination. I think there's such an important element of imagination in spirituality that doesn't get named, I think, often enough. At least for me, imagination has always been incredibly important to how I understand spirituality. And I think, part of being neurospicy is that our relationship to our imagination looks a little bit different to each of us. And it's been really important for me to connect with that. I'll just say, related to that actually my first spiritual perspective came from Star Wars. Like the philosophy of the
Yeah,
Force
wow.
was actually, in the absence again of structure or spiritual community, the what was said about the universe and about life in that imaginative art space of these movies very much informed how I thought about spirituality and still does to this day. And so I think I would advise people to really pay attention to where their imagination takes them and then root that into the world here and now. Now I can see that Star Wars drew heavily on Buddhist philosophy, but misunderstood quite a bit of it, right?
Yeah.
And so I can now take my deeper understanding of those origins and my direct experiences with them and realize that my interest in them came from engaging in this movie, but bringing that into a more concrete form in my life was kind of the missing piece.
Oh, I love that. That's that's perfect. That's the cherry on the cake for me. Yeah. Yeah, look, there's so much more I feel like we could talk about, but I feel like this is a nice window into what practice means for you and spirituality. And I just think these conversations are so important. So again, I'm just so grateful for you, yeah, sharing with us and taking the time to share. So thanks very much, Michaela. Did you have any last words that you wanted to say?
Oh, I just want to thank you again for opening this conversation and for, providing a prompt and a thread into this kind of reflection that I hadn't been proposed before. Again, like I said at the beginning, I think it's so valuable to take moments to reflect on our path and to do that in curious, compassionate conversation with folks is such a gift. So thank you so much for creating this space. And it's also got me thinking about kind of the next era. It's like when
Mm.
you're in the moment, like having a chance to kind of step back and say, there's been these three eras of my life with regard to spirituality. I wonder what the next era will be. So I have a curiosity about that now that I didn't have before.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, we'll bring it to a close. See you next time. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
Oh,
friend.
what did you think of that? I really hope you got something from that. Even just enjoying Michaela's story about, when she was young, going to her magical place in nature, experiencing these like deep spiritual experiences. Her journey through her life to get to where she is, knowing who she is in the world and living her true nature. I love how she weaves her practice into her day. I love that she's really honest about, it's hard for people like her and like me sometimes to create routine. It just doesn't work for us. We have to find the way that works for us, and she has. I really love hearing how she's done that. What's your opinion? What do you think? What did you get from this? Make sure and check out Michaela's details in the description and check out her podcasts. Thanks for joining. And if you liked this interview, definitely like and subscribe. And remember, the world needs the gifts of your wild heart. It really does. Thanks.